When we picture the great hunters of prehistory, our minds leap to saber-toothed cats, dire wolves, or massive bear dogs. But what if some of the earliest mammalian predators didn't have claws or fangs in the way we expect, but hooves? Long before lions ruled the savannas or wolves prowled the forests, some of the most formidable predators on Earth were, astonishingly, hoofed mammals. These weren't passive grazers, they were active hunters, shaping ancient ecosystems with tooth and speed. To understand how radically mammal evolution has shifted over time, we must unearth a forgotten age when the prey of today were once the predators of yesterday. Today, few animals come to mind faster as prey than ungulates. Whether it's the even-toed artiodactyls like deer, pigs, giraffes, and hippos, or the odd-toed perissodactyls such as horses, rhinos, and tapirs, these mammals dominate the herbivore role across the world. But that success comes at a cost. They've become synonymous with being hunted. Across modern ecosystems, ungulates are prey royalty, the main course in nature's oldest drama. Lions stalk zebras across the savannah, tigers ambush deer in dense forests, and wolves run down elk in snowbound woods. These hoofed mammals have become so central to the predator's diet that we often forget this isn't just a food chain, it's a co-evolutionary arms race, one that's been escalating for at least 15 to 20 million years. Predator and prey locked in a deadly rhythm, with ungulates playing the hunted so convincingly, it feels like that's all they've ever been. But history tells a stranger tale. If we could rewind time to the Eocene or Oligocene, roughly 50 to 30 million years ago, we'd enter a world that defies our modern expectations. In this ancient landscape, ungulates weren't just prey, they hunted. This was an era when hooves didn't just gallop away from danger, they ran it down. Several groups of carnivorous ungulates rose to power during the forgotten chapter of evolution. The Archaeotheriums, for instance, descended from plant-eaters but evolved into predators with crushing jaws and carnivore-grade teeth, predators in herbivore clothing. Even more remarkable were the Mesonychians, wolf-like in appearance but ungulates in ancestry. With oversized skulls and bone-cracking jaws, they didn't just compete with true carnivores, they often dominated them. And they weren't alone. Multiple hoofed lineages independently adapted to hunting, becoming fast, efficient killers. For a time, they were among the ruling predators of Earth. So the next time you see a deer or a horse and think prey, remember, their ancestors once told a different story, one where the hunted wore hooves, but so did the hunters. Out of all these different groups, there's one that really stands out. They showed up during the Eocene, and while they looked a bit like modern pigs on the surface, they actually came from a super ancient branch of artiodactyls distant from today's pigs and most other hoofed animals. Not many close relatives of theirs are around anymore. They might not have been the sneakier hunters, but they were definitely some of the toughest. Their pig-like look hid massive killer jaws and teeth unlike anything in modern animals. This group earned one of the coolest nicknames ever, the Hell Pigs. These Entelodonts flipped the whole idea of hoofed animals being just prey. They became some of the biggest and most dominant predators in their ecosystems, often going head-to-head with traditional carnivores, and frequently coming out on top. With huge size, terrifying teeth, and relentless tenacity, they ruled their Paleogene world like absolute kings. Among them, one Entelodont shines as the icon of the group. Not necessarily the biggest or strongest, but definitely the most famous. Archaeotherium. Thanks to an incredible fossil record, we know more about its life and hunting habits than almost any other member of this lineage. This beast flipped the script on ungulates as prey by dominating an environment filled with some of the largest hypercarnivores ever, ruling as the undisputed top predator of the ancient American West's White River Badlands. The rise of Archaeotherium and Entelodonts in general ties into the bigger story of carnivorous hoofed mammals, one of the earliest success stories of the Cenozoic. Ungulates had been around since the late Cretaceous, and after the dinosaurs went extinct, they quickly got big and took over lots of niches, not just the plant-eating ones we think of today, but also predator roles. Early in the Paleogene, ungulates were among the first large mammalian carnivores. Even before the classic carnivores showed up, groups like the Archaeotheriums, which were sort of dog-like and hoofless, had strong jaws and sharp teeth, and were some of the earliest big meat-eaters, with species like Archaeotherium growing to the size of big cats. Even more impressive were the Mesonychids, bear-sized, bone-crushing predators that dominated much of the early Cenozoic world. They had huge jaws, a near-global range, and could take down just about any competition. It was truly a golden age for predatory ungulates. So it's no surprise that another group of predatory hoofed mammals jumped in by the early Eocene, and that group was the hell pigs, the Entelodonts. Long before pigs, deer, and antelope grazed the modern plains, their ancestors prowled the prehistoric world as something much more dangerous. Back in the Eocene epoch, some 55 million years ago, hoofed mammals known as artiodactyls were just beginning to evolve. Unlike their peaceful, plant-munching descendants, these early archaeodactyls came in strange shapes, wild sizes, and in some cases, with teeth sharp enough to tear meat. One particular offshoot, the Cetacodontomorphs, would prove especially pivotal. Today, this group is only represented by hippos, and another surprising lineage we'll meet later. But back in the Eocene, they were rising predators. These Cetacodontomorphs first appeared in Asia and were among the earliest meat-eating artiodactyls. They ranged from the small and sneaky Indohyus, a cat-sized piscivore, to the monstrous Andrewsarchus, a giant, wolf-faced predator the size of a bison, possibly one of the largest terrestrial carnivorous mammals of all time. With skulls built like powerful wrecking tools and jaws lined with slicing teeth, these were not your average grazers. From this fearsome stock emerged something even more bizarre, a family of powerful omnivores that would become infamous as the hell pigs. By about 40 million years ago, these brutal beasts had arrived, born in the ancient forests and floodplains of Asia. From there, they stormed across the Northern Hemisphere, Europe, Asia, and eventually North America. One of the earliest pioneers of this transcontinental takeover was Brachyhyops, but it was in North America where these animals truly came into their own. Here, they evolved into their most successful and fearsome forms, none more so than Archaeotherium. Even at a glance, Archaeotherium shows why Entelodonts earned the nickname Hell Pigs. Its hulking, pig-like body and a face only a Paleocene nightmare could love looked built for destruction. It had a bulky frame reinforced with thick bones and powerful muscles that formed a prominent hump over its shoulders, similar to modern bison, and its size, downright intimidating. The average Archaeotherium mortoni stretched up to 2 meters long over 6.5 feet, stood 1.22 meters or 4 feet tall at the shoulder, and weighed nearly 400 kilograms, 882 pounds, about as big as a full-grown male black bear. But some individuals, previously lumped under Megacoerus, were even bigger. Fossils of these giants show skulls up to 66% longer than average specimens. Using those proportions, the largest Archaeotherium may have reached over 2.5 meters, or 8.2 feet in length, and weighed more than half a ton, on par with a mature male polar bear. But brute strength wasn't their only weapon. Despite their massive build, Archaeotherium and its kin were surprisingly fast. These were not clumsy brutes, they were biomechanical marvels. Their limbs featured elongated lower leg bones, fused radius and ulna for streamlined movement, and no clavicle, allowing longer strides. Their wrists had fused bones for added strength, and they lost some digits to lighten the load. Their greatest evolutionary trick? The double pulley astragalus, a specialized ankle bone unique to archaeodactyls. This adaptation limited side-to-side motion, but enhanced forward thrust, giving these beasts a powerful piston-like gait. Most archaeodactyls developed this to flee predators, but Entelodonts used it to become predators themselves. And once they had the tools for the hunt, they unleashed something far more terrifying. If there's one trait that made Entelodonts truly fearsome, it wasn't just their size or speed, it was their jaws. And in this arena, Archaeotherium reigned supreme. The skull alone was a monster. Average Archaeotherium mortoni individuals had heads up to half a meter long, massive by any standard. Larger Megacoerus specimens reached nearly 80 centimeters, about 2.6 feet. Supporting this were thick neck ligaments and muscles anchored to towering spinal ridges and the sternum, forming a bison-like hump. This gave Archaeotherium the power to lift and swing its enormous head with ease. Behind those thick skull bones lurked one of the most fearsome bites in the mammalian fossil record. The enlarged zygomatic arches and temporal fossae housed massive temporalis muscles, capable of crunching bone like a vice. Its huge cheekbones held thick masseter muscles for grinding, while an enlarged postorbital bar resisted twisting forces. The skull was built not just for eating, but for destruction. Most herbivores didn't open their mouths wide, but Archaeotherium had a gape rivaling carnivores. A low coronoid process and thick mandibular tubercles allowed an impressively wide and forceful bite. This was no idle feature. It was designed for grappling, tearing, and dismantling. At first glance, you might think this creature was a gnarly herbivore. After all, pigs and hippos have big teeth too. But Archaeotherium was different. Its lower jaw could move side to side, typical of grazers, but that's where the resemblance ends. The gape, skull, muscles, and especially the teeth tell the real story. Its molars looked pig-like, rounded and bunodont, good for crushing, but the incisors were sharp, large, and interlocking, tools for gripping and slicing, typical of predators. Its canines were tusk-like, but unlike pigs, they were round in cross-section, serrated along the edges, and toughened for killing. This design resists twisting and pulling forces from struggling prey, and serrations slice flesh. These canines interlocked perfectly with opposing teeth, acting as guides for occlusal alignment, an efficient shearing mechanism shared with modern predators like wolves and bears. The wear patterns confirm a carnivorous diet. The premolars sealed the deal, sharp-edged, conical, slightly serrated, with thick enamel and zigzagging Hunter-Schrager bands for shock absorption, features seen in hyenas. These teeth crushed bone with interlocking surfaces, showing wear patterns virtually identical to modern bone crushers. All this evidence points to a brutal reality. Archaeotherium wasn't a passive plant eater or mere scavenger. It was a full-on omnivore with a savage edge, ripping flesh, crushing bone, and swallowing chunks of meat whole. An ungulate with the heart and hardware of a predator. So next time you hear hell pigs, remember, it's not just how they looked, they earned that name. Still, it's fair to ask, was Archaeotherium truly a predator or just a specialized omnivore? After all, modern peccaries and pigs have strong canines, wide gapes, and use tusks as occlusal guides, yet mainly eat plants. The final brutal proof comes from fossilized evidence of a kill. In the Oligocene sediments of Wyoming, paleontologists unearthed the disarticulated remains of several Poebrotherium, small, sheep-sized camels that once roamed the plains. Many of these bones were missing entire hind limbs or even their entire rear halves. More strikingly, the bones bore deep bite marks and puncture wounds, telltale signs of violent trauma. The size, spacing, and placement of these bites point to a single culprit, Archaeotherium. At first glance, scavenging might seem like a reasonable explanation, but the story these bones tell goes deeper. Among the chewed and shattered remains, many bite marks were concentrated around the skull and neck, regions scavengers usually avoid. There's not much meat to be gained there, and even if a scavenger fed on those areas, it would consume them completely, not simply bite and abandon them. These were not feeding marks, they were killing blows. The evidence paints a clear and chilling picture. These camels weren't just consumed, they were hunted, dispatched by skull-crushing or spine-severing bites to the head and neck. Their bodies were then torn apart, dissected by the Entelodont's jaws. Hindquarters, rich in muscle and fat, were likely swallowed whole. Intriguingly, the width of a Pobrotherium's pelvis fits almost perfectly within the gape of Archaeotherium's jaws. After the feast, what remained of the carcasses was stashed in meat caches, leftovers for another day. This wasn't passive feeding, it was predation, plain and simple. With that grisly snapshot frozen in time, the rest of Archaeotherium's adaptations fall perfectly into place. Though omnivorous in principle, capable of grazing on roots, fruits, and foliage, it was no less a predator than any saber-tooth or wolf. It hunted with the same confidence it browsed, and it did so with the terrifying efficiency. Imagine it in action, lying in wait, hidden in the tall grass or the brush, eyes locked onto its prey. When the time came, it launched forward with shocking speed, propelled by long hoofed limbs evolved not for fleeing but for chasing. These legs, the same ones other ungulates used to escape, were here repurposed to hunt. Closing in, the beast would clamp down with a punishing bite, its powerful jaws stabilized by interlocking canines and reinforced by immense neck muscles, stopped prey dead in their tracks. If the victim was lucky, death came swiftly, a skull-crushing bite shattering bone and severing the brain or spinal cord. Otherwise, the unfortunate creature was devoured alive, torn apart limb by limb while still conscious, much like how modern pigs behave today. Once subdued, the Entelodont tore into its prey with gruesome puncture and pull bites, swinging its neck like a wrecking ball to rip meat from bone. It began with the hindquarters. Working forward, nothing went to waste, not even the bones, which its Dirophagus premolars cracked open to extract marrow. In that moment, the illusion that all ungulates were mere prey falls apart. Archaeotherium and its fellow Entelodonts were something else entirely. They weren't background characters on the food chain, they were the top of it. In a world before big cats and bears took the crown, these were the beasts that dominated. They held ecosystems in their iron jaws, suppressing even early carnivorans and redefining what it meant to be a hoofed mammal. This was the age of carnivorous ungulates, and more precisely, the age of the Entelodonts, and Archaeotherium was its undisputed apex. If any Entelodont seized the Oligocene spotlight with flair, it was Archaeotherium. This beast didn't just survive the changing world of the late Eocene and early Oligocene, it thrived in it. From around 35 to 28 million years ago, Archaeotherium roamed what we now call the White River Badlands, a fossil-rich stretch of land bordering the Great Plains and the Rocky Mountains. Today, it's a cracked, chalky wasteland, but back in its prime, it was a thriving mosaic of life, a tangled web of swamps, braided rivers, dense woodlands, and open plains. This was no empty wilderness, it pulsed with life. Early hornless rhinos lumbered across the plains. Tiny hyracodonts darted between shrubs, and strange sheep-like oreodonts shuffled through the underbrush. Brontotheres and dawn horses fed in the forests. Early camels, like Pobrotherium, flitted through open woodlands, and watching them, waiting, was Archaeotherium. It didn't wander aimlessly. In its lush territory, it filled the role of something like a hyper-predatory grizzly bear. Sure, it would chomp down on roots, nuts, and fruit. But when meat was on the table, be it carrion or still kicking prey, Archaeotherium didn't hesitate. Fast, powerful, and shockingly nimble, it could easily run down smaller herbivores like Poprotherium and tear them apart with its bone-crushing jaws. But Archaeotherium wasn't the only killer stalking these floodplains. The Badlands were home to an entire rogues gallery of predators, all vying for dominance. There were Hyaenodon species, dog-like predators that ranged from wolf-size Hyaenodon horridus to lion-sized monsters, Hyaenodon megaloides, both equipped with massive skulls and meat-shearing teeth capable of dismantling prey in a heartbeat. Then came the Nimravids, the false saber-tooths. From lynx-sized Dinictis to leopard-sized Hoplophonius and jaguar-sized Eusmillus, these cat-like hunters slinked through forests, striking from cover with fatal precision. And don't forget the bear dogs, the early amphicyonids, canine-faced predators that filled the ecological shoes of wolves and coyotes long before either group existed. Rounding out this cast were the Bathoniphids, towering flightless birds related to modern Seriamus, stomping around the plains like deadly secretary birds on steroids. With this many jaws on the land, you'd think Archaeotherium would have a tough time holding its own. But the truth? It wasn't just keeping up, it was in charge. For one, it avoided direct competition. Hyaenodon stuck to the open plains, while Nimravids lurked in denser forests. Archaeotherium ruled the woodlands and river margins, prime middle ground real estate, and when it came to sheer size and brute force, none of its contemporaries could touch it. Across its 7 million year reign, the only real rival in size was Hyaenodon megaloides, and even then, that matchup would have been limited to smaller Archaeotherium mortoni individuals. Larger members, possibly the so-called Megacoirus morphs, reached bison-sized proportions. By comparison, the next biggest carnivore, Eusmillus adelos, was just over half the size of a typical Archaeotherium mortoni. Everything else was simply outclassed. So while the rest of the predators hunted and scrapped, Archaeotherium took what it wanted: prey, territory, even the kills of other hunters. Its biggest threat? Its own kind. Fossil skulls show clear signs of intraspecific combat, deep gouges, bite marks, even broken jaws, all pointing to brutal clashes between individuals. These weren't scuffles over scraps, they were violent, face-biting brawls, likely over territory, mates, or dominance, not unlike what modern pigs or big cats engage in today. As the Eocene gave way to the Oligocene, Earth's climate shifted dramatically. A sudden cooling and drying event, known as the Eocene-Oligocene transition, or more evocatively, the Grande Coupure, reshaped the planet. The lush wetlands and meandering river systems that Archaeotherium thrived in began to vanish, replaced by more arid, open landscapes. To its credit, Archaeotherium didn't go quietly. It managed to hang on even after the Grande Coupure had swept through, but it was already living on borrowed time. The environment it once dominated had turned against it, and eventually, by around 28 million years ago, Archaeotherium vanished, brought down not by a predator, but by a changing world. The Entelodonts as a group kept going for a while longer. They even evolved into some truly massive forms, like the bison-sized Daeodon, and even more carnivorous relative of Archaeotherium. But evolution alone wasn't enough. By around 15 to 20 million years ago, the Entelodonts too disappeared, leaving no survivors. But that wasn't the end of the story, not for carnivorous ungulates, because Entelodonts came from a much larger lineage known as the Cetacodontomorphs, and while the Entelodont branch ended, two others carried on. One line gave us modern hippos, mostly herbivorous but far from harmless. The other? That branch took an entirely different path. some cetacodontomorphs in South Asia began pushing deeper into the water, chasing fish and adapting more and more to an aquatic life. Over time, they became something utterly unrecognizable. Their limbs morphed into flippers, their bodies streamlined, hair was lost, their tails evolved into powerful flukes, even their nostrils migrated, forming the signature blowhole we know today. These weren't just oddball mammals anymore. They were whales, descendants of hoofed, land-dwelling predators who traded savannas for oceans and never looked back. So yes, the Entelodonts were gone, but their legacy lives on, in every breaching whale, in every deep-sea hunt. Archaeotherium may be extinct, but it helped pave the way for an entire evolutionary saga, one where ungulates proved they could be more than prey. They could be predators, apex ones. And who's to say that story is over? Given how adaptable ungulates are, and how even modern pigs dabble in predation, maybe one day, millions of years from now, the world will see the rise of new hoofed hunters. Creatures that, like Archaeotherium before them, walk a path between herbivore and carnivore, and reclaim a crown their ancestors once wore.